Well, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know who put me last on this agenda. It's a beautiful day to be in North Carolina, and I want to thank all of you for joining us from all across the country. What an honor to be in the presence of so many giants of the environmental justice and civil rights movement, especially as we conclude a week-long commemoration of the birth of the environmental justice movement, whose roots are firmly planted right here in Warren, North Carolina. You know, as a proud son of North Carolina, I was born and raised, and I was just a child when the state decided to site the PCB landfill in the backyard of a predominantly black community. But I remember my parents discussing the heroism of the women and men who locked arms and laid down in front of those trucks carrying that laced dirt with PCBs. Women and men like Dolly Burwell, Ben Chavis, Reverend Bill Kearney, EPA's own Charles Lee joined protesters in solidarity. A Washington Post story at the time quoted Reverend Luther Brown, a pastor of the largest black congregation in the area, and he said, "We know why they picked us. It's because we're a poor county, poor politically, poor in health, poor in education, and because it's mostly black." But he also said nobody thought people like us would make a fuss. But boy, did they stir the hornet's nest. Because what this community lacked in political power, they made up for in courage. What they lacked in access to education, they made up for it in heart. What they lacked in terms of money in their pockets, they made up for it in faith, in hope, and perseverance. So not only did this community make a fuss, this community ignited a movement. And today, Warren County is synonymous with being the birthplace of environmental justice. You know, those protests 40 years ago were not only a catalyst for the environmental justice movement as we know of today, but it was a real awakening of the consciousness of this community that had been underserved and overburdened for so many years. It demonstrates the transformative potential that exists when people peacefully mobilize and come together in a common pursuit. As Ms. Dolly Burwell put it, African Americans determined that henceforth and forevermore will have some say in the government that was controlling our destiny. So despite losing the initial battle, these visionary women and men sparked something so much bigger, so much more powerful. And that's what we're here today to honor and to uplift. The reason we've reached this moment when environmental justice is front and center to President Biden's agenda and EPA's agenda, is because of the unrelenting advocacy of so many of you here today. It's because of faith leaders and civil rights leaders, the labor community, the environmental justice community, folks like Vernice Miller-Travis, Dr. Bob Bullard, Reverend Barber, Dr. Wright, Juan and Anna Paris, and young leaders like my good friend, Lamisha Whittington, William Barber III, who are carrying this sacred mission forward. These are the people who have dedicated their lives to standing up and speaking out against racism and injustice and inequality. And they are finally being heard at the highest levels of the land, from Warren County to the White House. On day one of this administration, President Biden directed every single member of his cabinet to embed environmental justice and racial equity into all of our decision-making. And you know, I'm proud to say that EPA is at the heart of that mission. As administrator, I've had the privilege to travel across the country and see firsthand the injustices communities of color, low-income communities, and tribal communities continue to endure. Last November, I launched the Journey to Justice Tour, and I spent time in Jackson, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, meeting with communities on their front porches, in their churches, and in their schools. And the conditions that I saw on the ground were deeply troubling. I'm talking about children going to school right next door to chemical plants. Elementary school students using porta potties because of failing water infrastructure. And generations of families living in the shadows of petrochemical facilities. In my time as administrator, I've met with mothers whose children have been poisoned by the lead in the water, the water they drink. Elders, our grandparents, who must bathe with bottled water. Families watching as the flood waters continue to rise. Perhaps one of the most egregious examples of systemic injustice, you've heard it today, is Lowndes County, Alabama. Lowndes County, which sits right in the middle of Highway 80 between Selma and Montgomery, was a wellspring for the civil rights movement. The birth of the Black Panther Party. Lowndes County became known as Bloody Lowndes because when organizers and protesters attempted to register black people, they were beaten and battered, even evicted from their homes. So I visited Lowndes County so that I could see up close the injustices that folks have been living with for decades. Pipes protruding from the side of their homes, spilling raw sewage in the same places where their children play. I'll never forget two beautiful children that I met, their toys scattered around a lagoon filled with waste. It was as if these children were conditioned to accept that this is the way it's supposed to be. But that's not the way it's supposed to be, not for those children in Lowndes County, not for the children in Jackson, Mississippi, not for the children anywhere in the United States of America. So from Lowndes County, Alabama to Warren County, North Carolina, these communities show us that the fight for civil rights and environmental justice are inseparable. For health justice, for racial justice, for economic justice, for climate justice. We cannot be for one without being for the other. President Biden and Vice President Harris, they understand this viscerally. The president and vice president see everybody for who they are and who they can be when they're given the opportunity to soar. So from Justice 40 to the bipartisan infrastructure law to the historic Inflation Reduction Act, we are finally ensuring that communities who have long borne the burden of pollution see, breathe, and feel the benefits of the federal government's investments. It's about changing how our government works and who it works for, something that so many of you today have dedicated your lives to realizing. So if we're going to change how the system works, we have to change the structure of the system. And that's exactly what we're going to do. I could not be prouder to announce that today EPA is creating a new national office charged with advancing environmental justice and external civil rights. We are elevating environmental justice and external civil rights to the highest levels at EPA, placing this critical work on an equal structural footing with our Office of Air, our Office of Water, and all of EPA's other national program offices. This new office, the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, will dedicate more than 200 EPA staff to solely focus on environmental justice and civil rights. These talented career and political individuals will also be responsible for administering over $3 billion for environmental grants, environmental justice grants. We toss around money these days, so I like to say billion would it be? Billion would it be? To communities who have not had access, who haven't had a seat at the table, who haven't had the infrastructure in place to apply for these dollars, and who have been underserved for far too long. This is not only good for the community, it will improve the agency as a whole. It will improve our ability to infuse equity, civil rights, and environmental justice to every single thing we do, from our regulations, to our enforcement, to our policy. It will ensure the vigorous enforcement of civil rights laws that together with all of these actions, prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, as well as sex, disability, and age. It will memorialize the agency's commitment to delivering justice and equity for all, ensuring that no matter who sits in the Oval Office or no matter who heads EPA, this work will continue long beyond all of us to be at the forefront and the center of everything this agency does. You know, when I first stepped into this role, I made a pledge to every person in this country who's ever had to worry about the safety of the water they drink or the air that they breathe. I pledged to them that everything we do, everything that I do at EPA, will be rooted in the realities and the demands and the aspirations of communities like Warren County, North Carolina, Mossville, Louisiana, Jackson, Mississippi, and so many others whose future hasn't always felt certain. We will use our time here and our own capacity to make change in the pursuit of a more just nation where all children can thrive. We will live and breathe our mission to protect people's health and the planet. And we will do so by ensuring that all people, no matter the color of their skin, how much money they have in their pocket, or the community that they live in, realize the full protections of environmental laws. We will ensure that a child from the south side of Chicago is treated with the same level of dignity and respect and compassion as a child from any wealthy suburb across this country. My brothers and sisters, this is essential work. It's the work that I came to this administration to do, and it's the work that you all have been demanding for generations. So together, that is what we will do. Together, that is what we will do. Let's go. Thank you all.
EPA Administrator Michael S. Regan. The Administrator will now memorialize this historic moment with the official signing to establish the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights.